Hey everyone, Killer Orange Cat here. If you follow my channel regularly, I'd like your honest opinion on the sound of this video. I'm using a new microphone which was a gift from a good friend of mine named Kevin, and I'd like to know how it compares to the one I have used before. Enjoy! Number 1. Shop Class. If you ask any of my friends, gay or straight, they would tell you that I don't come across as being gay. I mean, I think that it is kind of silly, because it's pretty subjective as to what being gay seems like. But most people don't know unless I indicate it. The reason I bring this up is that when I was in high school, I lived in a very rural and conservative area. I had myself figured out by the time I was in junior high. But things were different at the time, and I was way too scared to tell anyone I was gay. In fact, I was often absolutely terrified of anyone ever finding out. In my freshman year of high school, I had a pretty terrifying experience. If you're older, I'll ask you to try and remember what it was like for you when you were in high school. You had all that confusion and all those hormones, and adding a ton of fear just really exacerbated the whole experience. I had to make sure that in gym class, I always kept my eyes to myself. I was always terrified of looking too long, you know. About a month and a half into the semester, I was in shop class. There was this guy that I liked in the class. I didn't really know him, though. One day, when I was varnishing my shelf, he and two of his buddies were working right next to me. The shop was big, and the teacher was nowhere near us. He began talking to me, asking how I was doing with my project. I let him know I was doing fine, and I asked him how he was doing. I never would have predicted his answer. He reached down, grabbed his crotch, and sort of massaged it a little bit, and he said to me, "Oh, I'm incredibly horny. How about you?" I felt my nervous system jump. I told him I was fine. He then asked me, "I'm thinking about going into the bathroom and jerking off. Want to join me?" So, my 15-year-old mind was like, hell yeah, but I wasn't going to admit it. I declined, and he insisted that I should do it, because it's a good way to pass the time. And don't worry, this story is not going to turn rated X. I didn't do it. Part of me wanted to believe that he wanted to do it, but most of me suspected this was a way to try and get me in a bad position to beat me up or something. It didn't stop that day either. This became a really regular thing during shop class. Whenever the teacher wasn't around, and he and I were around each other, he'd do it again. He'd always ask if I wanted to go into the bathroom and beat off with him. Of course, each time, I think he noticed the conflict I was going through. I thought he got a real thrill out of treating me that way, too. After a while, I figured it had to be obvious that I was gay, and what he was doing to me. When I was working on a new project, weeks after this treatment began, he and I were again close to each other. The whole thing started all over again, and it was really too much for a 15-year-old male to go through. This time, on this day, I paused way too long, and he smiled, and sort of hinted that he wanted me to come closer to him. He was working on a piece of equipment. I forget really what it was called, but when you pushed a piece of wood into it, it pretty much reduced it to sawdust. I walked up to him until our faces were only a few inches apart. He gave me a really sexy look and flicked his eyes down at his crotch. "No one's around," he told me. "Cop a feel." I can't even tell you why, but I began moving my hand in that direction. As I got close, I darted my eyes around the room to make sure that no one was watching. In that split second, I felt him grab my wrist, and he quickly pushed my hand towards the machine. Fortunately, my reflex was quick enough to keep my hand from being ripped apart. But he was stronger than me, and he held his hand there and tried to push mine into the machine. I looked in his eyes for a quick moment, and that sexy, playful look was replaced by pure hatred. I screamed for help. Immediately, a big football jock, who was the closest around, ran over and saw what was going on. He grabbed the guy, pulled him off me while the whole class came running over. The jock explained to the teacher what happened, and he restrained the guy who tried to destroy my hand. The look, the hatred, the anger, and the justified look on his face never left, and I had never been more scared before or after. He was kicked out of school, but charges were never brought up against him. I did see him again a few times, but he never talked to me. He just gave me that hateful look. Number 2. Friendship. I guess sometimes, even if your school has a gay-straight alliance, you never really know how people will react to you coming out. People react differently to it, and sometimes that reaction could be very negative. When I came out, things were pretty positive. But one of my friends, a guy named Mike, seemed very put off by it. Now, Mike and I were not the greatest friends, but we were in the same group, and we were mostly friendly. But he got to the point where he wouldn't even talk to me. In fact, if I tried to initiate a talk, he would give me a few dismissive words and then just shut up. Sometimes you have to expect that sort of thing, you know? I stayed late after school one night that fall. There was going to be a football game that night. A few of my friends were going, but I had no interest. But I kept them company until it was time for the game. When they left for the game, I went to walk home in the dark. I lived in a neighborhood right behind the school I went to. I also lived far back in the neighborhood. After I'd gotten a few blocks away from the school and all the commotion, I felt like I was pretty much alone. As I walked around one block, I turned and I noticed that a block down, someone was walking parallel to me along the road. I did a bit of a double take when I realized it was Mike. I almost waved out to him, but then I thought better of it. He was obviously uncomfortable around me when we were with friends. I hated to think I would be making him even more uncomfortable when we were alone. I decided the best thing to do would be to give Mike his space. Still, as I walked down each block, I turned to see him, and he was still walking down the street just like that. I knew that he didn't live out in that direction, so I began to wonder why he was doing this. It was then that a weird thought occurred to me. I wondered if maybe the reason Mike had been so uncomfortable around me was that maybe he was gay, but was having trouble expressing that. I thought maybe he was coming out that night to try and get a private talk with me so I could help him. No sooner did I think that, though, but he wasn't on the next block. And then I thought that maybe I was wrong. He wasn't following me, so I put it out of my mind. My parents weren't at home, so I was home alone when I arrived. I went to take a shower, and then I was going to make dinner and read. I got out of the shower in nothing but a towel and walked back to my bedroom. Right upon opening the door, and before turning on the light, I was startled to see someone sitting on my bed, looking right at me. I was so surprised that I didn't even flip the light on. "Mike?" I asked. I figured I didn't lock the door, and he had actually been following me. He must have let himself in the house. He didn't answer me. He just sat on my bed, staring at me. The look was so blank, so odd. I went to turn the light on, because I was so put off by this. I was actually a bit worried, and just a tiny bit scared. As I turned on the light, he stood up from the bed. I watched as he slipped something shiny into his pocket. He pushed roughly past me and ran out of my house. Sensory memory is a weird thing, and often it can take you a few moments to realize what you have heard, seen, felt. When he passed me, I realized it was a knife. I didn't know why he had it. Did he intend on hurting me? Was he really gay and was gonna hurt himself and thought maybe I could talk him out of it? I don't know. He never mentioned it, and our friendship never recovered. He, in fact, quit hanging out with my group. I have no idea what Mike is up to now. I hope he's happy, and I hope he wasn't planning on hurting either me or himself. Number 3. Gym shower. I had never lived in the country before. I grew up in an urban and suburban atmosphere for the most part. When I was 16, my parents decided to move out to the country. I have to say, it was a real shock to my system. Once I was 18, I went to college away from home, and have since moved back to the city. One of the hardest things about this move was making friends. I guess they didn't tend to get a lot of new students, and by high school, most friendships were very established. Not only was it difficult to get in with new people, but I hadn't had to make new friends in such a long time that I just didn't really know how. So because of that, I ended up spending a whole lot of my time to myself. One of the worst things about the move was that I actually felt I had to closet myself. I was out in my previous high school, but the new school was different, and I just didn't feel comfortable being out there. I think the worst thing was that I went from a school where gym class was an option to it being a requirement, and of course, with that came the necessary showering after gym. Now, I know what a lot of people might be thinking. Oh, it must be like a gay kid's heaven to get to shower with other guys after gym class. Maybe for some people, but I really didn't want the experience. I was terrified of getting aroused and then having the crap kicked out of me afterward. I did the only thing I could think of to do. I told the gym teacher I was gay, and that I thought it would create problems. He agreed, and therefore he sort of made me like his assistant during gym class. I never had to do any exercising, so I didn't need a shower. But he would always give me credit for it. I felt good, and I felt like it was nice to have someone who I seemed like I could trust. Things began happening, though. Guys in the class began treating me a bit differently. I sort of suspected they had figured me out. I know you shouldn't assume you even know what someone is thinking. Like one day after class and during shower time, the guys were looking at a porno magazine, and they were arguing about something, and one of the guys remarked that they should ask me because I would know. So the guys showed me the picture with a guy and a girl, and immediately asked me a question about how much I liked the guy's junk. And when I asked why the hell they were asking me, I'll never forget the response. Because Coach told us you were a fag. I didn't know how to react. I mean, first the betrayal, and the second being outed like that against my will in front of a whole gym class full of boys. I immediately tried to walk away, but one of the guys grabbed me before I could. While I struggled, I was shocked that the guys actually began stripping my clothes off. When they had me naked, they grabbed me and pulled me into the showers. I kept screaming while the guys who were not taking part in this just watched and laughed. But the worst part, the guys took out Brillo pads. Now, this is what happens to anyone who doesn't shower, one of the guys told me. It doesn't matter that you're a fag, that's just a perk. The guys scrubbed me down thoroughly in the shower with the Brillo pads. It was agonizing, but they didn't do it hard enough to break the skin. But I was red, hurting, humiliated, and terrified. When they were done, they left me shivering, naked in the shower with my skin burning. I was too terrified to get up, to get dry or dressed or anything. It wasn't until the janitor came into the locker room that he helped me get up and get dressed. Apparently, he told me that this thing occasionally happened to guys who didn't shower with the rest of the class, and told me it was better for me just to shower from now on. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. Just wanted to update those of you who follow the channel. I am currently in Chicago for a couple of weeks to do some things here. I'll hopefully have the time to do a lot of channel work in this time. We'll see if that happens. If you want to read print versions of these stories, you can do that at the Killer Orange Cat subreddit. In the meantime, if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please consider hitting the subscribe button below, or using the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Feel free to leave me a comment, let me know what you think of the video, and consider sharing this with someone you think might enjoy it. You can always follow Ichigo and myself on Facebook and Twitter, using the links in the description. If you have a story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to send it to the address provided in the description. My main requirement is that the story is original, meaning it has not yet been read on any other YouTube channel. And please, whatever you do, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, 'cause you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.
Have you ever encountered true evil? How? I've told this story before, about meeting a murderer. Was a journalist on weekend duty. Got called out to a story, guy claims his car was hijacked with his 2-year-old son in it. I met him at the police station, he seemed devastated. I was devastated, I'd done plenty of grisly crime stories, but a missing kid is next level awful. Next day I had my day off, the regular crime reporter called me. They'd arrested the dad and found the little boy's body at a rubbish dump. He did it out of revenge for his wife cheating. It still bothers me to this day how I could have felt so much sympathy for this man. I shook his hand, I cried with him. I'm usually very good at picking up when someone is off. Just goes to show you, true evil disguises itself very well. Back in 2011 my uncle down in Mexico had got kidnapped by one of the cartels. They gave my entire family on my dad's side a random, $10,000 and we would get him back. My dad called in people who owed him money and managed to get the 10 grams. He sent it down to the family down south and they paid the ransom for my uncle. All we got in return was my uncle's lifeless body. A few years ago a friend of mine was going through a nasty divorce. Like really bad. He came to visit me one evening as I was getting off of work. When I sat down with him he just seemed off, like a completely different person than the man I had known before. Blank stare in his eyes, no smiling, anger behind everything he said. I chalked it up to the divorce and just thought to myself that he would get better when everything calmed down. I told my wife when I got home about seeing him and she agreed with my assessment. I bumped into his ex-wife and some friends a few days later at another work event. She was actually out celebrating their divorce being finalized, I think, and she invited my wife and I over to a house party. That would be the last time I saw her. My wife and I ended up not going to the house party but the ex-husband did show up. He killed 9 people, including his ex-wife. In Iraq there was a family that we would go see every other week or so while on patrol. We would ask them how things are going and if there was anything they needed us to do. They were a respected family in the area and did a lot to build their community to defend against the violence committed by the insurgency. It was a big family, lots of kids, 3 wives. They were good people just trying to better their community. Their house just happened to be one Arad that was kind of a border between Al-Qaeda controlled territory and coalition controlled territory. One day we were patrolling the road as we did several times per week. And we came across a hole that had been blown into the road making it impassable by vehicle. We turned around and got back onto the road a few miles further down and encountered another hole just like the first. The holes were about 2 miles apart and effective created a corridor for Al-Qaeda fighters to cross the road more freely. We dismounted to get to the family's house. Everyone was on edge. Once we arrived at the house it was immediately noticeable that something was wrong. It was silent and there was a smell surrounding the house. Inside was the most terrible thing I have ever seen. The entire family was gathered into the central room of the house where they were all tortured, raped and murdered. There was maybe a half-inch of blood that was congealing on the floor. If you looked at the scene you could tell the order that it all happened. The father was killed last, the daughters were unclothed and laying face down, the mother and baby were killed with one bullet at the same time. By the time we had arrived they had all been dead for 2 or 3 days already. I think about this every day and I've had to stop to cry 3 times just to write it out. My stepmother's 6-year-old nephew is showing all the signs of being a sociopath and a sadist. He has severely physically harmed several students in his school, including trying to drown a classmate in the toilet several times. He once tried to strangle a little girl. He locked his older sister in a metal garden shed with a padlock for 4 hours in 100-degree weather and lied about it when asked. The police were called because his mom thought it was a kidnapping. They heard the girl screaming and released her. Their dog had puppies and they kept one. He slammed the dog's head in a car door, killing it. He routinely holds a lit lighter to his body, including his genitalia. He enjoys hurting others. These people live in the mountains and to get from their house to town they have to come down the mountain, so a road that is on the edge of the mountain. The little boy unbuckled himself, as his mom was driving around a bend where there was a 200-foot drop on the other side, and put his hands over her eyes. More recently he found a belt with a metal buckle and started beating a neighborhood kid with it. One morning his mother came into the kitchen to get breakfast ready and found him hiding behind the doorway with a large knife. She dodged just in time as he swung at her. Even more recently his aunt gave birth to a new baby. My step-aunt woke to go get the baby for a feeding and couldn't find him. They looked everywhere. The 6-year-old was watching with a smile. They eventually found the baby in the dryer, asleep but sweaty. The boy regularly physically attacks his mother and sister, leaving them bloody and bruised. A few months ago I went up for stepmom's birthday and the little boy was present. We were all staying the night at the house. He spent the whole day being sweet and loving towards me, until nighttime, when suddenly he stared at me with these horrible emotionless eyes and told me he didn't like me anymore and wanted me to leave. He then went around the hall and stared at me for a while. I didn't sleep that night. My kids went to visit their mom in the UK on a court-ordered visit. I knew what was going to happen but couldn't prevent the visit. Sure enough, rather than put them on a plane back to me in the USA, she went on the run with them and her boyfriend. I got a lot of help from the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the US State Department, and the Scottish government paid all my legal fees over there. During the 5 months she had the kids, she tried to brainwash them. She told them if they came back to me, I would allow them to be molested, and kill them. This was relentless. My son was incredibly strong and refused to believe her or cooperate. They were 13 at the time, but my daughter was much easier to manipulate. I really don't know for certain that they weren't physically abused, but a lot or the stuff she accused me of, was things she and her then boyfriend, now husband, did to the children. I had to fly to Scotland to appear in a trial. I walked out of the courthouse at 9 p.m. on a Friday night with the children. Normal process for these cases is to have a designated handover 2 or 3 days later, but the child psychologist who interviewed us all was positive that my ex-wife would kill the children, and the judge agreed. I got them back in the clothes they stood in. I have no doubt she would indeed have killed them rather than hand them over to me. 5 years later, she has no contact with the children, their choice. They have anxiety and depression, but are doing remarkably well. They are high school seniors now, and they make me proud every day. When I was a boy, I had a wicked stepmother who reveled in beating me. She would beat me when my father was not present, threatened to kill my brother if I said anything. She would use whatever objects were convenient to beat me with. Wooden spoon, hair brush, dowel rod, rolling pin, her hands, fists, belt, whatever. One time she used a serpentine belt. She'd hit me where it wouldn't be visible when my father wasn't around. At one point, she had me drop my pants and underwear, and beat me until I nearly passed out. I jerked/tensed out of pain and kicked off of her lap, and kicked her in the face. She proceeded to pick me up by my leg and beat my balls with a wooden spoon. I'm not sure if she counted as evil, but she certainly counted as sadistic and vindictive. My birth mom was abusive. She beat my brother mercilessly and let her boyfriend molest him. She ignored all of us daughters. Went days without eating. There was a kid in my 6th grade class who loved designing his own custom shanks and then stabbing people in the arm or back with them. He had a look of pure joy on his face when he saw that he drew blood and caused suffering to another human. He was only suspended for a week the first 2 times he did this before they finally kicked him out of school after the 3rd time. I used to work with a woman years ago who was estranged from her husband. The day before her husband was going to take their daughter to Disney World, she smothered her daughter with a pillow and then tried, unsuccessfully, to kill herself. I worked with a guy in Ontario who was always posting on Facebook that he just adopted new puppy like every 4 or 5 months. He adopted them from all different shelters and people. Had to have about 8 or 9 at one point. We went to his house for some reason and there were no dogs. No signs of dogs, no toys, no food bowls, etc. We asked about the puppies and he just offhandedly pointed to the backyard, which we noticed was full of little mounds, and said they all were sick and died. Guess he just didn't have good luck with animals. The way he said it was cold. The CSPCA investigated him and tested the remains. He was putting small amounts of his own homemade poison in the dog food and conducting his own little LD50 test. I haven't, but I think my girlfriend has. She works at a preschool/daycare. Ages of children vary from infant to 5. She teaches the 3-year-olds in her part of the building. She told me that there is this one 3-year-old girl that is just a heathen. She literally only wants to hurt people. One day she got in trouble for hitting kids on the head with pots and pans. They use these in the sand pit for fun. She brought the little girl inside to talk to her, and the entire time she is just not listening. Mid-sentence the little girl looks at my GF dead in the eyes and says, "Can you let me go outside so I can hit more people?" The next day she was expelled because she just kept hitting kids in the head with pots and pans. Laughing about it. How do you get expelled from a preschool? I worked the same job and I knew this girl from roughly age 3 to 7, and she is the only person I can confidently say is a sociopath and is a genuinely scary person. She'd coerce people into picking fights with each other, lie, steal, and break things so others couldn't use them. She also had her parents believing she was innocent and perfect, and seeing the way she acted around them I could see why. The worst was when I caught her watch 2 boys, she got to fight each other, with the most satisfied look I'd ever seen. I pulled her aside and asked her why she'd set them at each other, and she played dumb and innocent. I eventually told her I wasn't buying her sweet act essentially, and I'd never seen anyone's face go that emotionless so quickly before. She basically said, "What are you going to do about it?" And like literally what could I do? Timeout did nothing, taking her things away did nothing, telling her parents did nothing. It's been about 6 years since I saw her, so she's in middle school now, and I sometimes wonder if she's still the same. I felt like my aunt was pretty evil, and she was a kindergarten teacher no less. She pulled my arm out of its socket one time when I was 4 and she was helping me cross the road. I visited her when I was 16, and every opportunity she got she would whisper in my ear, "You are worthless. You are nothing. And just keep walking." The visit ended with her trying to strangle me after I took issue with her trying to force feed my brother Ginger, and that was the last time my family spoke to her. I remember fantasizing about getting back at her in some way for a while, but then moved on with my life and grew up. Years later, she was being her typical self with my uncle, her brother, and berating him, calling him worthless, and he shot her in the head, killing her. It was a real tragedy for the family as he shot himself afterwards as well, but I certainly have not missed my aunt. The first boyfriend I ever had, we were both 16. He was a pathological liar and a sociopath. He slowly became possessive and controlling, wanted to be together constantly, would accuse me of wearing things that were too revealing, isolated me from my friends. When I tried to break up with him, he threatened to rape me and kill my dog. He pushed me out of a slowly moving car while his grandmother was driving. I was dumb as a box of rocks and had no self-esteem, so I didn't know any better. I nearly changed schools, my parents put me in therapy among other things. He ruined the first 2 years of high school for me. Over 20 years later he sent me a message on Facebook asking me how I was, like we were old effing pals. I didn't respond. Maybe he changed as an adult, but I seriously doubt it. I found out he died a couple years ago. He was involved in a crime involving his young daughter, and I'm pretty sure he was facing prison time. My husband has. I've wrote about it before, so I copied and pasted. My husband's little sister was 9 and he was 12. He also had 2 girl cousins close in age as well. His uncle raped and killed his sister after killing his aunt. That night when my husband went to the bathroom, he didn't shut the door all the way and the uncle was watching him through the crack. Turns out his sister was folded and put into the bathroom cabinet, and had my husband walked to the back of the bathroom, the uncle would have killed him as well. The uncle went on the run that night, and the next day, my husband and his cousins were playing hide and seek, and my husband ended up pulling his aunt with her head 3/4 of the way off, up from behind a futon. She was wrapped in a carpet. My husband is doing pretty well now. He obviously has PTSD, but he is a great dad, a little overprotective, but that's understandable, and a great husband to me. He is a hard worker and super loving. He has had a miserable life up until we got together 16 years ago. But he really is amazing. He loves with all of his heart. I really am a lucky woman to have a guy like him with the heart he has. Ong, please tell me the uncle is in jail or dead. He is on death row in San Quentin. But he will die of natural causes long before he gets executed. I've spent a lot of time volunteering in a prison, as a teacher. Every one of my students are good people who made bad decisions and are paying their debt. I've never thought of them as evil. Except for one student. Very intelligent man. Serving time for killing his wife in a particularly heinous way. In casual conversation, he refers to her as his ex. Like, my ex and I went to Greece once. I was shocked the first time I heard him do it. She's not your ex-wife, man. She didn't divorce you. You chopped her to pieces. Closest thing to casual evil I've ever seen. I haven't encountered it, but my aunt's side of the family has 2 brothers that are corrupted policemen in China. While on his deathbed, the father's ankles were twisted in attempt to get the inheritance.